Hi, buddy. It's Jeff here. I'm going to be doing one of these videos on the working with Germans, and this is the kind of the focusing on the specific works by Hofstede and all on the cultural or the six dimensions of cultural national cultures, national culture. Um, and so what I want to do is focus on one right now that is called power distance. It's similar to, but different than um, the one that was done by Melissa Lamson on the high hierarchy and low hierarchy. It's stated in a different way, and I think that's where the main difference is. Though it has a lot of overlapping with Melissa Lamson said in her the hierarchy, high and low. And this power distance one, I'm going to explain it, but I think it really depends on what culture you come from, how you explain it. Because I've seen it explained by people in Germany, because we're going to work with Germans, right? The way I've seen it explained by others uh, is different than how I would explain it, having come from a culture that is not, or a home culture that is not highly has a low hierarchy. So it's really interesting to see the differences. Sorry, how you how you how you kind of define this. So I got to clear my throat, but it's going way here. Um, so the power distance thing is kind of the concept of it here is the degree at which the degree to which the less powerful members of a society accept and expect that power is distributed, you know, in is the way that power is distributed unequally, and how they expect that. And the fundamental issue here, and this is the way a German explains this, the fundamental issue is how a society handles inequalities among people. Uh, so that's how society handles inequalities among people. Um, and so the high of this is that people accept a hierarchical order in which everybody has a place and which needs no further justification. You have the power distance, the high power, the power, people in power and the people not in power. And then the low version of this, at least explained from a German point of view, is people strive to equalize the distribution of power and demand justification of equalities of power. So it's this. So the explanation is to equalize it, you have to this distribution of power, and you demand justification for inequalities of power. Now, from that again was explained from a German point of view. But the interesting thing is I can see this from a non, or from that's from a German point of view. It has high hierarchy, right? Which you've already seen from Lamson. So where the hierarchy order is actually established, is cultural built in. It's really in the DNA of the culture, so heavily that everything is influenced by, right? But coming from a culture that's not based on that, or has a lot more low hierarchy, has a lot more focus on hierarchy, and which comes from a past, actually from several hundred years, not too many several hundred down. It's only about 300, in which the whole industrial revolution for the United States was built on all the immigrants coming and all having pretty much equal status. I mean, it didn't, but there was a lot more focus on allowing to have everybody and the whole American dream and whole the background. That whole thing gives it for there's already a distribution of power. Now, that's not quite true because we can deal with the fact that they're the social wealth, there's not equal distribution. But equal, wealth is not always the distribution of power, right? But it depends. But it's really interesting that I would talk about. I wouldn't explain this in the idea of having it that we're having to justify the inequalities of power, and that we need to have it. I would just say it's a distribution of power, just plain distribution of power, um, and not focusing on the fact that it's inequality, just that you make everybody equal, right? In principle. So I wouldn't. I'd give a different definition of this, but in the end, it's arriving at the same kind of positioning. How do you deal with the fact that there is not equal power, right? What do you do to make that to deal with it? Do you just allow for the hierarchical structure to make the decisions, or do you move away from a hierarchical top-down thing to more something grassroots, which is not completely consensus? It's more collective, in a more kind of a collectivism approach to the decision making is happening at a lower level, and then what happens it can actually influence overall. But this is the whole power distance thing. And so, as you've been seeing, I've already been explaining how this applies to the Germans because it's so obvious that this is part of the culture, and we can really see this in, I've mentioned in the other videos on this topic and the other chapters on this, actually in this whole topic here, the Hofstede's book, or Hofstede's works. Actually, it's three of them. It's Hofstede and all. That this dimension has really kind of a close overlapping with some of the other ones that we talked about. You already talked about masculinity versus femininity. We've already dealt with some of the other, factors of that. We actually dealt with kind of the other ones too, of individualism, collectivism. So we're kind of seeing this whole thing, right? But here, the power distance is very a key one. I'd say if we had to kind of order all these, or we had to put them in order of priority, and how many were just like they were so present that you couldn't deny it. This one is the German culture is really heavily emphasized the power distance in the high aspect of it, right? Now that's changing, and I've already mentioned as people have said about the Melissa Lamson article, that Germans are saying, I've got Germans I've been kind of surveying, kind of in an informal way, just to kind of get an idea of is this evolving, is this really true, and seeing their perspective of it from themselves rather than everyone else's perspective of the Germans, right? Because it's usually done that you ask the other people what they say about Germans. They're going to say Germans dominate, right? They want to dominate. With some truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. And they actually believe that they're really good at a lot of specific things, especially when it comes to manufacturing and everything, right? They dominate the Europe, especially Europe, on this. And they got a pretty powerful economy. But the whole thing now is, how do you deal with the equality aspects of it? And there are I said there are generations that are changing. People have mentioned that the generation is changing, but it's still true. It's still there. It's still present. It's still very present in the culture. And as one person said, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy until maybe someone's able to break out of that mold, right? But it's still kind of where it is. So what I would say is here that, and I'm going to cover another chapter on this. I'm going to have a very specific chapter of my own interpretation of all of these points, of both Lamson's and Hofstede and All's and other stuff too. Because I mean, like I said, I've got other training courses here that talk about it from a lot of the big multinational companies, right? And the thing that you want to kind of mention is, I'm going to cover that specific chapter, my own interpretation of it, and a very specific interpretation of how German culture is evolving right now, or dealing with that right now. But this chapter specifically is just on this power distance. It's very present. It does exist. They're struggling with it, and they're dealing with it, right? So there's the whole thing, right? Now, other cultures have a different kind of way of approaching this, the kind of the low the low hierarchy aspect, right? But let's just say that the Germans have that have the power distance and tend to like to keep that power distance, right? They tend to like to keep it in place, which creates the whole escalation culture, which creates the entire um, way of you know, using power and hierarchy in order to make decisions. A lot of top-down stuff, a lot of top-down stuff. And decision making tends to be the top make the decisions and you just cascade it down, right? Trickles down, cascades down. It doesn't trickle up, it cascades down, right? It doesn't trickle down, it comes down, right? It falls downhill. And that's kind of the difference because you always know it's going to always come up and then come down hard, right? So it's going to always have that thing. Um, so the that's kind of a that's kind of my take on that, how that is. Not my take on it, but this is how the book was presented and stuff, or their works are presented. Uh, so, so that's pretty set. Don't have to really say much more about it. It's pretty clear, and it correlates with the other ones that other works that say pretty much the same thing, just in a different way with different words, slightly different words, a little more into the psychology of it, kind of the psychological aspects of it, rather than just say hierarchy and it's a plus and minus value, right? Because here it's making you think about it a little bit more in depth of why it is, rather than just the fact that it is. But that's what it is for that. So let's head on to another chapter or a different chapter and see what it is, right?